Tonight's conversation addresses a devastatingly common issue among Angelenos, and one that is all too often unseen: interpersonal violence, also known as domestic violence. For our conversation tonight, we'll be using these terms as well as their abbreviations, IV or IPV and DV. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, 4,000 victims of interpersonal violence are killed in the U.S. every year. And this is just an astounding statistic, but nearly 1/3 of the women who seek care from hospital emergency rooms are there for injuries resulting from domestic violence, a truly staggering statistics. Behind these numbers, however, are real people who often don't know where to turn. Tonight, we'll be talking about this public safety crisis and what we can do as both a community and a council office to end it. Firstly, I want to ask you guys a question because I want to make sure that we're starting with a definition of what interpersonal violence really is.
You know, I think when we think about domestic violence, we think about physical abuse, right? That's the first thing we think about. But in reality, it can be anything from economic abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and sexual abuse. It's any type of behavior that one person is trying to use to gain power and control over the other person, and to maintain that power and control.
I think there's a tendency to really focus on physical violence and bruises or injuries, and that's often when the point of law enforcement comes through. But having talked with hundreds of survivors over the years, you know, often it is the emotional damage, and that takes a lot longer to heal from. And if we can start shifting away from just waiting to need physical violence to intervene, then I think we can really have the conversations about prevention and early intervention that can hopefully help, I think, change systemically just the significant prevalence.
What I do find with domestic violence and throughout the years is there is no socioeconomic status to it. It's at all levels, it's all genders, all types, and unfortunately, it's a lot more prevalent than I even think we know. Because like as I indicated, we always seem to be called when it's much more physical, and that's when people have said, I've had enough.
The reality is the numbers are astonishingly high, and particularly for certain subset populations, so including bisexual women, LGBTQ, Black, Indigenous people of color, youth across the board, and transgender people. And so just to put it into numbers, about 60% of bisexual women will experience intimate partner violence, 50% of trans people. LGBTQ youth are 3 times likely to experience dating violence.
We get roughly, 40,000 calls that are, that are DV related annually. It could range from legal services that they may need, they may need shelter services, maybe they need temporary. I think what we want to do, and we're starting to do more of this, is provide flexible funding for our providers so that they offer alternative types of supports, because shelter isn't the only option, and it should not be the only option. And we're starting to see that trend, not just in the city, but in the county, I think at the federal level, and certainly with our homeless service agency as well.
I want to talk a little bit about the stats that we just heard, because I do think that we hear these numbers and they're alarmingly high, but I've also heard that there's significant underreporting around DV. And I was just wondering whether any of you could speak to that issue.
I know it's underreported because, the officers will talk to the victims and they're like, it's just too much this time. Now they're hitting the kids. Now, look at my face. And I know they haven't called multiple times, but I also think it comes to immigration status. I think it comes to, gender preference. They're afraid of law enforcement and what the response may be. I think our homeless population is extremely vulnerable. I'm sure that we don't hear everything that goes on within those, encampments. And I think some of the women, especially, they're extremely vulnerable. I've walked those encampments. I've talked to some of the ladies, and through the mayor's office, was able to get some real help, and through our partners, which is fantastic. But I truly believe that we're pricing, about this much.
I mean, I would absolutely agree. There's a deep stigma, and there is just a feeling of shame, and that is deeply rooted in a person's ability to come forward and seek help. And I think, again, if we're really trying to expand the definition and support more individuals that are experiencing this type of trauma, we have to look beyond the physical and look at, again, the psychological and the emotional and the economic abuse. Oftentimes, again, there's control over them. And so it could be that they're not allowed to work. And so where do they go, especially if they have children? So I think there's real challenges. And I think as leaders in this space, as committed individuals that are really trying to help as many people connect to services, is really amplifying that services are available, and then continue to advocate for the increased availability of these services as well.
A lot of people won't make a report because it wasn't physical. We do see a lot of sexual coercion within relationships and domestic violence where the victim may not see it as rape or sexual abuse because they're like, well, this is my partner, therefore I'm obligated to. So a lot of times that goes underreported as well.
Work to be done.
Yes. And I had one last question, which was actually about kind of police being the first line of response to many issues related to domestic violence and issues related to trust of LAPD, which I think, especially over this last year and a half, has been a real issue. And I'm curious to know how you've addressed these issues and how everyone else on this panel might offer either ways to address that issue or ways to offer alternatives to calling law enforcement that are needed in the city for people who may not be able to have that trust.
Those are difficult times. We're not seeing people at their best when we arrive at the door. We train our officers to be compassionate, to do a thorough investigation, because I think you need to get all those issues. I mean, those are that preliminary investigation really gives us information and insight when a victim, for cooperation. So we train our officers regularly. We go out with, like I said, a service provider, the DART, and I think that that's fantastic. They respond to these domestic calls. They offer the services. They bring that perspective, maybe that softer perspective than the uniform you may see.
And I think that's a good, really important thing for people to know, that if you call related to domestic violence, an officer is likely not going to come alone.
Yes, they'll be with the provider.
That they will be with the provider. And I think that's useful information to share with the public and for people to know. So, I think that's, I didn't know that before.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic program, and the mayor has been, putting that at the forefront and continuing the funding even in, the most difficult times.
Yes, and we've been able to create a great partnership with LAPD and our Strength United advocates. They'll go out to the roll calls, and it's not just about our domestic violence victims and the children. Every shift that they're on, they'll go to the roll calls and they'll say, hey, Strength United advocates here, if you get a walk-in, if you come across somebody that may need our services, please let us know. They also provide them with the psychoeducation that they may need, and also talk to them about the services that are available, because, officers aren't really thinking about that. Officers aren't case managers or part of social services. So we do bring that, component to the divisions that we work at. And, we've been able to help out in that sense and bridge that gap.
I think one of the reasons that community partners are so important is we do not require that someone file a police report, so we can work around. And if you want to file a police report, we can also have an advocate go with you. And so I think that's really important.
Another way to address this issue.
And if people are experiencing bias or problems, that we're also around to assist with that.
And we will welcome the advocate in with the victim, the whole process, because it makes it easier for us to have somebody to lean on and that emotional support and that relationship you already built to make that better interview and help us with our case.
I feel like I learned a lot today about the system that we have in place to address this issue. So thank you all. I'm so grateful for you and for what you've shared with us tonight, and appreciate your presence here. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you are in immediate need of assistance, please call LA County's Domestic Violence 24-hour support line at 1-800-978-3600.